Hello students, I hope all of you are doing great, and now we are going to start the second lecture of our chapter, that is our environment. Now in this chapter we are going to study about the very first topic, and that is the components of ecosystem. Now in the last lecture we have studied about what is ecosystem. There are two types of ecosystem. The first is natural and the second is man-made ecosystem. Now we are going to talk about what are the components, what are the constituents units of ecosystem. So basically there are two components of an ecosystem, and they are categorized as, there are two components of an ecosystem. There are basically two components of an ecosystem, and the very first is biotic component. The very first one is biotic component, and the second one is abiotic component. So these are the basic two components of ecosystem, and biotic and abiotic. Now we are going to discuss each one of them in very detail. And the very first one, that is biotic component. So biotic component, we are going to discuss that what it involves. So biotic component, it basically includes three types of organisms. Biotic component means the living organisms, and it basically includes the three types of organisms. Biotic means living, and it basically includes three types of organisms. It will basically include the three types of organisms. The first is producers. The very first one are producers. The second one are consumers. And the third one and the last one are decomposers. So we are going to talk about what are producers, consumers, and decomposers. Also, you have been studied about all of them in previously in smaller classes. So we are going to talk about them in detail now. That what are producers, consumers, and decomposers, and how do they make up the biotic component, and how do they make up the ecosystem basically. Now, the very first topic that we are going to discuss is the producers. What are producers? The producers are all the green plants that can produce food. So producers are that can produce food, and these are all the green plants. The blue-green algae, the green plants, the blue-green algae, and they can produce the food, and they can produce, and they are called as producers because they can produce their food. That is, the food is the sugar and the starch. Sugar and starch from the inorganic substance using light energy. They can produce their food from inorganic substance. Inorganic means the non-living substance. So inorganic substance using the light energy that comes from the sun. So using the sunlight or the light energy, using the light energy, and this process is called as photosynthesis. And this process is called as photosynthesis, and therefore all the green plants are called producers. Therefore all the green plants all the green plants are called as producers, and they are called producers, and they are also called autotrophs. That means the organisms that can make their own food. They are also called as autotrophs. They are also called as autotrophs, and the planktons are the very minute or microscopic organisms that are freely floating. So, we are going to discuss about the planktons. So, planktons are very minute or microscopic organisms. The planktons come under the producers only. So, the planktons means these are very minute or microscopic organisms. These are very minute or microscopic organisms that are freely floating on the surface of water. These are the microscopic organisms that are freely floating on the surface of water, that are freely floating on the surface of water in a pond, lake, river, or ocean. And planktons are also of two types. So we define and we classify planktons as two types. So planktons are also of two types. Now the two types are, the very first are phytoplanktons. Phytoplanktons, and the next are zooplanktons. We are going to discuss about them also. Now, what are the microscopic aquatic plants that are freely floating on the surface of water are called phytoplanktons, and the microscopic aquatic animals are called zooplanktons. So the microscopic, we can define phytoplanktons as the microscopic aquatic plants the microscopic aquatic plants that are freely floating on the surface of water, that are freely floating on the surface of water are called as phytoplanktons. They are called as phytoplanktons. And the next are the microscopic. The zooplanktons can be defined as the microscopic aquatic animals These are the microscopic aquatic animals that are freely floating on water, that are freely floating on water, that are freely floating on the surface of water, and they are called as zooplanktons. They are called as zooplanktons, and the freely floating microorganisms that are the freely floating protozoas are the example of zooplankton. The freely floating protozoa are the examples of zooplankton. Now, the next topic that we are going to discuss about is consumers. So consumers, these are the organisms that consume the other organisms or their products as their food. So these are the consumers are the organisms that consume other organisms as their food. So these are the organisms. These are the organisms which consume the other organisms. These are the organisms which consume the other organisms or their products as their food or their products as their food. And all animals belong to this category are the consumers. So all the animals that are the living animals belong to this category only. So this is very important that all animals are consumers and all animals belong to this category. Also, the consumers depend on producers that are the plants, all the living plants. So the consumer depend on the producers for their food directly or indirectly. The consumers depend on the producers. The consumers depend on the producers for their food directly or indirectly. For their food either directly or indirectly. And how do consumers get their food? So they get their food by eating other organisms or their products. So the consumers get their food they get their food by eating other organisms. They get their food by eating other organisms or their products. Or their products. And for example, we can take, for example, the consumers example are human beings, that is men is an example of consumer. Goat, they eat plants, so they are consumers. Deer, fish, lion, cows, buffaloes. So these are the common consumers. These are the common consumers. Now we are going to classify the consumers also. So consumers can be classified into the four types. Consumers can be classified. Consumers can be classified into four types. The very first one are herbivores. Next are carnivores. Carnivores depend on or they eat herbivores as their food. These are the flesh-eating animals. The third one are parasites. And the last one are omnivores. I hope this is clear to all of you. Now the very first topic we are going to look at what are herbivores. So what are herbivores? Now we are going to talk about herbivores, and herbivores, these are the organisms. So these are the organisms which depend on the producers and they eat the producers. That means they eat the plants. So herbivores, these are organisms these are the organisms and we can say animals which get their food by eating the producers or the plants. So they get their food which get their food by eating the producers or we can say the plants, because we know that producers are the plants only, the green plants that can synthesize their own food by the help of photosynthesis. So they eat the plants directly. And herbivores are also called the first order consumers. They are also called as the first order consumers. So herbivores are also called the first order consumers. And as we know, we all know the examples of herbivores. So the some common examples of herbivores, we can write it as the some common examples of herbivores are, there are some common examples and we have seen them in our general life also. They are deer. Rabbit is a herbivore because it eats the plants directly. Squirrel, goat, cattle, and etc. So these are some common herbivores. In cattle, all the cows and buffaloes come. So these are some common examples of herbivores. Now, the next topic that we are going to talk about are the carnivores. And the carnivores, we also call them as the second order consumers. They are called as second order consumers, and the carnivores are the organisms which consume other animals. That means which consume the herbivores. So these are the organisms. These are the organisms, and we can call as these are the animals that depend and they consume the other animals, which consume which consume other animals. And therefore carnivores feed on the flesh of herbivores. We can say that carnivores are the animals that feed on the flesh of herbivores. So therefore carnivores feed on the flesh of herbivores. They feed on the flesh of herbivores. And these are also called as primary carnivores, and we can also call them as second order consumers. They are also called as, these are these are also called as primary consumers or primary carnivores. These are also called as primary carnivores, or we can call them as second order consumers. They are second order consumers. The first order consumers are the herbivores, and carnivores are the second order consumers. They are called as the second order consumers. And some common examples of carnivores are, so we can take the examples of carnivores as snake, wildcat. Wildcat means all the cats that live in the, all the cats, wild cats. That means tiger, lion. These are the carnivores. Frog, jackal, jackal, fishes, etc. Now, if we are going to talk about carnivores more, so we get to know that carnivores they are the animals which prey upon primary carnivores. So these are the animals. These are the animals which prey upon these are the animals which prey upon primary carnivores. And uh, the primary carnivores are the herbivores, so they are called as second order consumers. That's why, because they prey upon the primary carnivores, so that's why they are called as the second order consumers. So that's why they are called as second order consumers. And we can take the examples of, for example, if we are going to look at the examples, so examples are owl, peacock, tiger. Tiger just depend on the deers and the other animals for their food. Lion, etc. So these are some second order consumers. So these are some second order consumers. And now we can talk about them. So the second order consumers, these are these are the consumers which are not preyed upon further. So we can call them as second order consumers because these are the consumers, or these are the carnivores. These are the carnivores which are not preyed upon further. That means nobody can depend on them for their flesh. So these are the carnivores which are not preyed upon further. These are the carnivores which are not preyed upon further, and they are called as top carnivores. For example, we can say that lion is a top carnivore because it cannot be preyed upon further. For example, we can say that lion is a top carnivore because it cannot be preyed upon further, and nobody can uh, eat lion for its flesh. Now, the next topic that we are going to look at is omnivores. Now we have studied about the herbivores and the carnivores. Now what are the omnivores? So these are the organisms which feed on both plants and animals. These are the organisms which feed on both plants and animals. So these organisms are the organisms which feed on both the plants and animals. Both plants and animals. And they are called as omnivores. And they are called as omnivores. Now, if we have to take the example of omnivores, then the most common example of an omnivore is us, that is the human beings. So human beings depend on both plants and animal products. So we are the most common omnivores. So human beings, we can say that human beings are common example. Human beings are the common example of omnivores because they eat both plants, because they eat both plants and in the form of plants we used to take the example like we eat pulses, we eat grams. So these are all the plant products only. So in the example of plants we can take that in the example of the plant products we can take as example as, for example, for example, we eat pulses, we eat the pulses, grams, oil seeds, and fruits, etc. And fruits, etc. So these are the examples of what we take as plants products as our food. And if we talk about the animal products, and animal products we take as food as they are milk, meat, egg, etc. So these are the animal products that we consume. So we consume both the plants and the animal products. That's why we are called as omnivores. Now, the next topic and the last consumers that we are going to talk about is decomposers. So what are decomposers? And we are going to talk about decomposers in very detail. So decomposers are the fungi and bacteria which break down the dead plants. We call decomposers as the fungi and bacteria. The fungi and the bacteria which break down that decomposers means which break down or which decompose. So which break down or we can say that decompose the dead plants which decompose the dead plants, animals, and we can say the complex compounds into the simpler ones. They decompose the dead plants and complex compounds and animals and complex compounds into the simpler one, into the simpler one. That means someone that break down the big complex compounds or the plants, dead plants and dead animals into a simpler one, that are called as decomposers, and they help in the replenishment of natural resources. They basically help in the replenishment of the natural resources. So decomposers help in the replenishment. Replenishment means the renewal of natural resources. The replenishment of natural resources, and they are also known as microorganisms or saprotrophs. We also call decomposers as microorganisms. So they are also known as microorganisms, or we can say as saprotrophs. Or saprotrophs, and they are also called as reducers. We can also called as reducers because they reduce the complex compounds into the simpler ones. So they are also called as reducers. Now we are going to talk about why the decomposers are so important. So they are very important because we are going to talk about what is the importance of decomposers. So the very first point in the importance of decomposers is that decomposers help in disposing of the wastes and dead bodies, because they help us. Decomposers decomposers help in disposing of the wastes. Disposing means they just reduce the wastes and they dispose the wastes. They help us in disposing of the wastes and dead bodies of the plants and animals. Of plants and animals, because if there are dead bodies of plants and animals, that will not be good for our environment. So decomposers help us to dispose that. So therefore they clean the environment. Basically they are called as cleaners of the environment, and they clean the environment. Therefore they clean the environment and create a space for living of new generation of organisms. And as they clean the environment, that means they create a space. So they create space and create space for a living of they create the space for a living of newer generation of organisms. Newer generation of organisms. Now we are going to talk about the next topic, that why the decomposers are important for the environment and for us. So the next topic that we are going to talk about, the next point, why decomposers are important for us, are that the decomposers release minerals and raw materials. As they decompose the organic matter or the dead plants and animals, so the decomposers release minerals, they release the minerals and other raw materials they release the minerals and other raw materials that are trapped in organic matter, and they are picked up by plants, and the raw materials that are they release, so these raw materials and these minerals are picked up by plants. These are picked up by plants, and this also helps to maintain the fertility of the soil, because they add minerals to the plants and they add minerals to the soils, so this also helps to maintain the fertility. So this also helps to maintain the fertility of soil. Now, there are some few points also in the importance of decomposers. And as you can see, that's how decomposers are important to us. So they provide the fertility to the soil, they clean the environment. And the third point is that the decomposers produce some acids which are useful. The decomposers, they used to produce, so the decomposers produce some acids. The decomposers produce some acids which are useful in and they are useful in solubilization of some minerals. Solubilization means that it helps in the solubilization. That means it helps in the solubilization. That means it helps the minerals to get soluble of some minerals. And the last point is that Decomposers help in recycling. Now, how they help in recycling, we are going to talk about that. So, decomposers help in recycling. Decomposers help in recycling the materials in the biosphere. They help in recycling the materials in the biosphere, and so that the process of life may go on and on. So that because they help in recycling the materials that are present in our biosphere, so the process of life is maintained. So they maintained and they ensure that the process of life, they ensure that the process of life may go on and on like an unending chain. Like an unending chain. I hope this is clear to all of you. And now, with this, we are going to end the lecture here only. And thank you, everyone.